Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Arrival 2016 Movie Review. Arrival is a 2016 American science fiction drama film directed by Denis Villeneuve and written by Eric Heiserer, based on the 1998 novella Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. The film stars Amy Adams as Louise Banks, a linguist engaged by the United States Army to discover how to communicate with extraterrestrials who have arrived on Earth, before tensions lead to war. Jeremy Renner, Forrest Whitaker, and Michael Stuhlbarg appear in supporting roles. Arrival had its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival on September 1, 2016, and was released theatrically in the United States by Paramount Pictures on November 11, 2016. It grossed $203 million worldwide and received widespread acclaim with praise directed towards Adams's performance, Villeneuve's direction, and the exploration of communication with extraterrestrial intelligence. Considered one of the best films of 2016, Arrival appeared on numerous critics' year-end lists and was selected by the American Film Institute as one of 10 movies of the year. It received 8 nominations at the 89th Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Cinematography, and Best Adapted Screenplay, winning Best Sound Editing. For her performance, Adams received nominations for a BAFTA, SAG, Critics' Choice. At the 74th Golden Globe Awards, Adams was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress and Johan Johansson was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score. The film was awarded the Ray Bradbury Award for Outstanding Dramatic Presentation and the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation in 2017. The score by Johan was nominated for Best Score Soundtrack for Visual Media at the 60th Grammy Awards. 12 extraterrestrial spacecraft hover over various locations around the Earth. In the ensuing widespread panic, affected nations send military and scientific experts to monitor and study them. In the United States, U.S. Army Colonel Weber recruits Banks and physicist Ian Donnelly to study the craft above Montana. On board, Banks and Donnelly make contact with 2 cephalopod-like, 7-limbed aliens, whom they call heptapods. Donnelly nicknames them Abbott and Costello. Banks and Donnelly research the complex written language of the heptapods, consisting of phrases written with logograms, and share the results with other nations. As Banks studies the language, she starts to have flashback-like visions of her daughter. When Banks is able to establish sufficient shared vocabulary to ask why the heptapods have come, they answer with a statement that could be translated as offer weapon. China interprets this as use weapon, prompting them to break off communications, and other nations follow. Banks argues that the symbol interpreted as weapon can be more abstractly related to the concepts of means or tool. China's translation likely results from interacting with the heptapods using mahjong, a highly competitive game. Meanwhile, the Russian team receives a message that they translate as "there is no time," which they interpret as a possible threat. Rogue soldiers plant a bomb in the Montana craft. Unaware, Banks and Donnelly re-enter the alien vessel, and the aliens give them a more complex message. Just before the bomb explodes, one of the aliens ejects Donnelly and Banks from the vessel, knocking them unconscious. When they wake, the heptapod craft has moved beyond reach and the U.S. military is preparing to evacuate in case of retaliation. General Shang of China issues an ultimatum to the alien craft in China, demanding that it leave within 24 hours. Russia, Pakistan, and Sudan follow suit. Communications between the international research teams are terminated as worldwide panic sets in. Donnelly discovers that the symbol for time is present throughout the message and that the writing occupies exactly 1/12 of the 3D space into which it is projected. Banks suggests that the full message is split between the 12 craft and that the heptapods want all the nations to collaborate in order to decipher it. Banks goes alone to the Montana craft, which sends down a transport pod. Abbott has been mortally injured as a result of the explosion. Costello explains that they have come to help humanity, because in 3,000 years' time they will need humanity's help in return. Banks realizes the weapon is their language. Learning the language alters humans' linear perception of time, allowing them to experience memories of future events. Banks's visions of her daughter are revealed to be premonitions. Her daughter will not be born until sometime in the future. Banks returns to the camp as it is being evacuated and tells Donnelly that the alien's language is the tool that was meant by the word weapon. She experiences a premonition of a United Nations event celebrating global unity achieved by finally deciphering the heptapod's language. At the event, General Shang thanks Banks for persuading him to stop the attack when she called his private number and recited his wife's dying words. He then shows her his private number and whispers his wife's words into her ear. In the present, Banks takes CIA agent Halpern's satellite phone from a table and calls Shang's private number to recite the words. The Chinese announce that they are standing down and releasing their 12th of the message. The other countries follow suit, and the 12 spacecraft depart. From what she has learned, Banks writes and publishes a book called The Universal Language, a guide to the heptapod language, which will eventually teach humanity to perceive time the same way as the heptapods. During the evacuation, Donnelly expresses his love for Banks. They talk about their life choices and whether he would change them if he could see his life from beginning to end. Banks knows that she will agree to have a child with him despite knowing their fate, that Hannah will die from an incurable disease and that Donnelly will leave them both as a result of her revealing that she knew this. As they embrace, Banks reminisces about the last time Donnelly will hug her. Arrival is based on the Nebula-winning 1998 science fiction novella Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. The novella involves Earth's first communication with heptapods who speak in a cryptic language. Screenwriter Eric Heiserer had been introduced to the story through another of Jiang's stories, Understand, and had begun reading Jiang's collected works when Story of Your Life had a profound emotional effect on him. As a result, he tried to adapt the story into a film script as he wanted to share it with a wider audience. After writing an initial spec script, Heiserer pitched it to production companies for several years without receiving any interest and nearly gave up on the project. Other studios turned down the project as they felt it was too smart. Heiserer believes it was not until he had successfully completed and produced 2013's Hours that others took interest in his work, his having proved himself capable. Eventually, Dan Levine and Dan Cohen of 21 Laps Entertainment expressed interest in Heiserer's script. Shawn Levy of 21 Laps said they had become aware of Story of Your Life around 2011 and considered it a powerful work. When they learned of Heiserer's script adaptation, they started working closely with him, helping him refine the script before they began seeking a director and distribution studio. One of the directors that 21 Laps approached was Denis Villeneuve. Villeneuve had wanted to make a science fiction film for some time, although he never found the right thing. Cohen and Levine introduced Villeneuve to the novella, which he immediately took to, although his work on Prisoners meant that he did not have the time to properly adapt it into a screenplay with Heiserer. Heiserer completed a first draft, which he and Villeneuve reworked into the final script. Villeneuve changed the title, as he felt the original sounded like a romantic comedy and that the script had become very different from the short story. While Villeneuve went through hundreds of possible titles, Arrival was the first one his team of producers and writers had suggested. Heiserer made several changes to Story of Your Life between writing his original screenplays and the final script, the main one being that the heptapods actually arrived on Earth in a type of first contact situation, as he felt this helped to create the tension and conflict needed for a film. Heiserer said that earlier versions of the script had a different ending. The gift from the heptapods was to have been blueprints to an interstellar ship, like an ark of sorts, to enable humanity to help them in 3,000 years. But after the release of Interstellar in 2014, Heiserer and Villeneuve agreed that this would not work, and decided that the heptapods' gift would be what was there in front of us, the power of their language. Amy Adams entered negotiations to star in the film in April 2014, and was confirmed by the time Jeremy Renner joined the film in March 2015. Forrest Whitaker signed on in April, with Michael Stuhlbarg joining in June. Adams consulted with linguist Jessica Kuhn to prepare for her role. Principal photography lasted for 56 days, beginning on June 7, 2015, after Renner had fulfilled his obligations to Captain America: Civil War. Filming was done mainly in and around Montreal, Quebec, with St. Fabien serving as Montana. The team took some time to find the right site to represent the landing of the spacecraft because producers wanted to avoid a mountainous site that might dwarf the scale of the ship, but thought a barren location would be cliched. Most of the filming that did not involve the exterior of a ship was done indoors on sound stages, although a real house in Chemin de l'Isle, Vaudreuil-Dorion, was used as Banks' home. The scenes of the university where Banks teaches were shot on the main campus of Université de Montréal, including HEC Montreal's auditorium and cafeteria. Bradford Young was sought out by Villeneuve as he was looking for a cinematographer with a sensibility toward natural lighting. Said Villeneuve, "I wanted the movie to have strong roots in realism. I wanted a cinematographer who would not be afraid to deal with intimacy. It's a very specific sensibility that I felt in Bradford's previous work." Color. Timing was used as a means of matching Louise's state of mind at a given moment. Young said, "I went for cooler colors when I wanted Amy to feel worn down. We tried to pull back on that a little bit, but then Denis stopped me in the color timing and told me not to be so concerned about skin tone and let her be pasty, let her exist in that melancholy space, let us feel that visually." When discussing the film with Villeneuve, Young described the director's goal of making a dirty science fiction film by making it look more grounded and slightly boring, as Villeneuve put it. Young also used the book Speedway by photographer Martina Hoogland-Ivanhoe as a reference for the film's look. Production designer Patrice Vermette discussed the film in a February 2017 interview with Popular Mechanics, saying that a big influence on the film's look was the works of James Turrell, particularly the design of the meeting room aboard the alien craft. "I wanted the simplicity and the sensorial experience you feel in a room like that. That big screen was always there in the script, and I used it as an element to unite Louise's world. For me, that big screen is more than a screen. That room, which they called in the script the interview room, is a classroom. That big white screen, you see it represented in Louise's house with the big window. You also see it in her school, in her classroom." Rodeo FX completed 60 visual shots for the film, and said that its biggest challenge was the sequence in which Louise and Ian first enter the alien craft. Both the book and the screenwriting required the invention of a form of alien linguistics which recurs in the plot. The film uses a script designed by the artist Martine Bertrand, based on script writer Heiserer's original concept. Computer scientists Stephen and Christopher Wolfram analyzed it to provide the basis for Banks's work in the film. Their works are summarized in a GitHub repository. 3 linguists from McGill University were consulted. The sound files for the alien language were created with consultation from Morgan Sonderegger, a phonetics expert. Lisa Travis was consulted for set design during the construction of the scientists' workplaces. Jessica Kuhn, a Canada Research Chair in Syntax and Indigenous Languages, was consulted for her linguistics expertise during the review of the script. Heiserer said at the Alamo Drafthouse's Fantastic Fest premiere of Arrival at the end of September 2016 that Chang's wife's last words, translated into English, were "In war, there are no winners, only widows." Villeneuve decided not to include subtitles for the line. Heiserer said he would have preferred it not be kept secret, and was happy to reveal the translation. Johan Johansson began writing the score as the shooting started, drawing on the screenplay and concept art for inspiration. He developed one of the main themes in the first week using vocals and experimental piano loops. The original soundtrack was released by Deutsche Grammophon on November 11, 2016. Max Richter's pre-existing piece on the nature of daylight is featured in the film's opening and closing scenes. Due to the prominent use of Richter's music, which had also featured in Martin Scorsese's film Shutter Island, Johann's score was deemed ineligible for the Academy Award for Best Original Score, the rationale being that voters would be influenced by the use of pre-existing music when judging its merits. A teaser trailer was released in August 2016, followed the next week by the first official trailer. Paramount Pictures released a series of promotional posters, with one showing a UFO hovering above a Hong Kong skyline that included Shanghai's Oriental Pearl Tower. The inaccuracy angered Hong Kong's social media users. The posters were withdrawn and a statement attributed the inaccuracy to a third-party vendor. In May 2014, while titled Story of Your Life, Paramount Pictures acquired US, Canadian and Chinese distribution rights. Shortly after, Sony Pictures Worldwide Acquisitions acquired international distribution rights excluding the UK, Australia, China, Greece, India, the Middle East, Turkey, and Israel. Entertainment One acquired UK distribution rights while Roadshow Films acquired Australian distribution rights, Reliance Entertainment for India. Ultimately it was MVP Entertainment that released it there, Lef Cinemas for Israel, Italia Film for the Middle East, Turkey, and Greece, licensing rights to Chantier Films for Turkey and Spensos Films for Greece. The film had its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival on September 1, 2016. It also screened at the Toronto International Film Festival, the Telluride Film Festival, and the BFI London Film Festival. The film was released on November 11, 2016. Arrival was released on digital HD on January 31, 2017, and on Ultra HD Blu-ray, Blu-ray and DVD on February 14 the same year. Arrival grossed $100 million in the United States and Canada, and $103 million in other countries, for a worldwide total of $203 million, against a production budget of $47 million. In the United States and Canada, Arrival was released alongside Almost Christmas and Shut In, and was originally expected to gross around $17 million from 2,317 theaters in its opening weekend, with the studio projecting a more conservative debut of $12 to $15 million. The film made $1.4 million from Thursday night previews at 1,944 theaters and $9.4 million on its first day, pushing projections up to $24 million. It ended up grossing $24.1 million over the weekend, finishing third at the box office. In its second weekend, the film grossed $12.1 million, a drop of 49.6%, and in its third made $11.5 million, dropping just 5.6%. Following its 8 Oscar nominations, the film returned to 1,221 theaters on January 27, 2017, an increase of 1,041 from the week before, and grossed $1.5 million, up 357.4% from its previous week's $321,411. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 94% based on 439 reviews, with an average rating of 8.40/10. The website's critical consensus reads, "Arrival delivers a must-see experience for fans of thinking-person sci-fi that anchors its heady themes with genuinely affecting emotion and a terrific performance from Amy Adams." On Metacritic, the film has a score of 81 out of 100, based on 52 reviews, indicating universal acclaim. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale. Robbie Collin of The Telegraph praised the film, calling it introspective, philosophical, and existentially inclined, yet it unfolds in an unwavering tenor of chest-tightening excitement. And there is a mid-film revelation, less a sudden twist than sleek unwinding of everything you think you know that feels, when it hits you, like your seat is tipping back. Brian Tallarico of RoachRebert.com gave the film 3 out of 4, it's a movie designed to simultaneously challenge viewers, move them and get them talking. For the most part, it succeeds. For Time, Sam Lansky called it sophisticated, grown-up sci-fi, a movie about aliens for people who don't like movies about aliens. IGN reviewer Chris Tilley gave it a score of 8.5 out of 10, saying, "Arrival is a language lesson masquerading as a blockbuster, though much more entertaining than that sounds. It's smart, sophisticated sci-fi that asks big questions, and does a pretty good job of answering them." Kenneth Turan of the Los Angeles Times praised Adams's performance, writing, "Arrival is really Adams' film, a showcase for her ability to quietly and effectively meld intelligence, empathy, and reserve." Writing for USA Today, Brian Truitt called Adams a definite contender for the Oscar for Best Actress, saying she was spectacular in giving Louise the right emotional balance. Conversely, Forrest Wickman of Slate had a more mixed opinion of the film, praising the cinematography and musical score, but writing that he thought it was similar to Christopher Nolan's only intermittently stellar Interstellar, and criticizing the dialogue as clunky. Rex Reed, writing for the New York Observer, gave the film 1 out of 4, calling it Villeneuve's latest exercise in pretentious poopery and referring to a lack of action in the storyline. The Guardian rated it the third best film of 2016. Critic Catherine Short said that it amounts to something transcendent, something to reignite your excitement for cinema, for life. Numerous other publications and websites, including IO9, Den of Geek Mir Fantastiki, The Atlantic, Blastr, and Digital Trends named Arrival the best film of 2016. In 2021, members of Writers Guild of America West, WGAW, and Writers Guild of America, East, WGAE, ranked its screenplay 27th in UGA's 101 Greatest Screenplays of the 21st Century, so far. In 2025, the film ranked number 29 on the New York Times list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century and number 20 on the Reader's Choice edition of the list. David Adger, professor of linguistics at Queen Mary University of London, had a favorable view of the accuracy of the linguistics in Arrival, saying, "The portrayal of trying different hypotheses about the language, coming up with generalizations, and testing them out was spot on." Similarly, Jessica Kuhn, a linguistics professor who teaches at McGill University and helped with the film's linguistics, said, "What the film gets exactly right is both the interactive nature but also that you really have to start small." She noted that the creators had not invented a complete language. Linguistics professor Betty Berner, who teaches at Northern Illinois University, said that the film's use of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis went beyond anything that is plausible. She also felt the film oversimplified the process of translating the aliens' language, skipping straight from Banks establishing the basic vocabulary of the language to her being able to understand abstract concepts such as weapon. At the 89th Academy Awards, Arrival was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Production Design, Best Film Editing, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Sound Editing, winning the last. Adams was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Drama, IACTA International Award for Best Actress, BAFTA Award for Best Actress in a Leading Role, Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Leading Role, and the National Board of Review Award for Best Actress, which she won. Composer Johan Johansson was nominated for Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score. I finally made it to the cinema to see Arrival last night, a couple of weeks after it came out to great acclaim. Promising an intelligent take on first contact with an alien species, with particular emphasis on the linguistic business of deciphering the alien language and writing system, it was a film I was very eager to see. I hesitate to call myself a linguist proper just yet, but my current research is very much on the linguistic and writing systems end of archaeology, and I'm very interested in any film adaptations of grown-up written science fiction. Arrival is based on a short story by Ted Chiang, so Arrival looked to be right up my alley. That said, some of my linguist friends were wary, fearful of how Hollywood would treat their discipline, despite the generally favorable reviews of Arrival's linguistic content. So in the end, how did it stack up? Was it the masterpiece several reviewers have hailed it as, or was my friend's caution justified? The answer, it turns out, is somewhere in between. Arrival is a good film. I'll just put that out there right at the start. I'm not going to try and be contrarian and say it's anything other than a very well-made, interesting, and thought-provoking science fiction movie. I'd wholeheartedly encourage people, including linguists, to see it, if for no other reason than that it's the kind of film I'd like to see a lot more of. However, despite the marketing, the linguistics content, of which there is certainly plenty, is unfortunately not its strongest aspect, or, ultimately, the one it's most interested in. It's difficult to go into specifics without spoiling things, but suffice it to say that Arrival is a film of two halves. The second is clever, satisfying and affecting, upending expectations and tying things up in a neat bow characteristic of the best short stories. The first half, by contrast, the half mostly concerned with the translation of the alien language, feels baggy, a little slow, and the linguistic elements don't quite ring true. Going back to what I said in my essay on science fiction and archaeology, it feels very much like a scientist's imagining of what arts and humanities research is like, rather than something fully grounded in research. Linguistics lecturers speak to vast lecture halls, beginning a day's class with things like "Today we're going to learn about Portuguese, and why it's so different from other Romance languages." Portuguese began in the Middle Ages, when language was considered an art form. Maybe it's different in America, but my linguistics education was mainly carried out in small rooms with small groups, lecturers going through the fine detail of morphology or phonology without much in the way of purple prose or rhetorical flourish. The film even seems a bit fuzzy on what exactly a linguist is. It's never clear what exactly protagonist Dr. Louise Banks' specialism is, and the film seems to waver between envisaging her as a linguist in the sense of someone who studies linguistics and works on the structures of languages, and a linguist in the sense of someone who knows and translates foreign languages, everything from Mandarin to Farsi, for a living. Ironically, this stumble over the ambiguity inherent in the word linguist is exactly the kind of thing Banks is so keen to avoid in her interactions with the aliens. Which brings me to the translation itself. I don't really want this review to be an exercise in nitpicking, but the whole method of understanding and translating the alien language doesn't really make a lot of sense. The fact that it's essentially being done by a single, apparently fairly junior, linguist and a physicist, who at no point does any actual physics, rather than a huge international team of the world's best and brightest, can perhaps be forgiven, as can the incredibly rapid pace of decipherment, but their method, essentially holding up a whiteboard with words written on it and pointing at things, would struggle even with the cultural and conceptual differences on Earth, let alone with something fundamentally alien. But that's enough on the negative. As I've said, once the decipherment is accomplished, the film picks up a great deal, and seems a lot surer of its footing. This is where I'm going to move into slightly more spoilerish territory, so feel free to stop here. Right. Arrival, it turns out, isn't really a film about translation at all, so much as the effect that contact with the alien has on the human mind. It's an internal, claustrophobic film, full of extreme close-ups and very shallow depth of field. The strangeness of the aliens, their fundamental otherness and the human struggle to cope with encountering that are all very well conveyed. These are not little green men but something far more uncanny, their half-glimpsed, octopus-cum-spindle-fingered hand appearance recalling the eldritch extraterrestrials of Lovecraft and his imitators, while still being distinctively different and memorably odd. But the main point of the film is with the effect of the alien language itself on human cognition, the so-called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. This comes in two flavors, strong and weak. The strong theory is that language determines the range of cognition, which has now been shown to be untrue. The weak theory argues that language has an influence on how people think, but stops short of complete determinism. That is fairly well supported by evidence. The theory has long been a favorite of science-fictional treatments of linguistics. There aren't many of them, but almost all the ones that spring to mind deal with the idea to a large extent. Arrival is in some ways a response to Samuel R. Delany's 1966 novel Babel 17, which covers themes, albeit infused with a layer of Cold War paranoia. Its eponymous alien language is in itself a weapon, causing its translators through the very act of understanding it to become the agents of their alien foes. More recently, China meevily turned the idea on its head in his excellent 2011 novel Embassy Town. Set in a long-standing human settlement on a world inhabited by extremely strange aliens with a particularly odd language, it deals with the catastrophic upheavals wrought on the aliens' mindsets and culture by communicating with humanity. I'm not going to go into any detail about how the Sapir-Whorf theory plays out in Arrival, because that really would be to spoil the fundamentals of the film. But I will say that it's both fascinating in its own right and leaves you asking a number of questions of yourself. I haven't yet read Tet Chiang's short story, Story of Your Life, but the friend I went with had, and the differences he cited explain a lot about the curious unevenness of Arrival. It seems that it's mostly the second half of the film that make up the short story, with the actual business of translation considerably fleshed out for the film. On the other hand, the short story features much more maths and physics. This would seem to suggest that the redundancy of the physicist character as anything other than Banks' unqualified assistant in Arrival and the rather scrappy and baggy first portion are problems of adaptation rather than the source material. I'll have to read Story of Your Life at some point and see whether that's borne out. So, overall, Arrival, thumbs up. Go for the linguistics, stay for the interesting meditation on how contact with the other can change minds for the better. And hey, the world needs more of that right now. Much has been written about the recent surge of personal stories being told through the horror genre in films like It Follows, The Witch and The Babadook, but there's an equally interesting trend in the science fiction genre as well. Over the last few years, we've seen the genre used not only to examine the power of space travel or a post-apocalyptic future but as a way to address common humanity more than futuristic adventure stories. Joining films like Gravity, Interstellar and The Martian is Denis Villeneuve's ambitious and moving Arrival, a movie that's about the day the universe changed forever but becomes more focused on a single story even as it's expanding its worldwide narrative. It is more about grief, time, communication, and compassion than it is warp speed, and it's a film that asks questions. How do we approach that which terrifies us? Why is it important to communicate through language and not action? The final act of Arrival gets to the big ideas of life that I won't spoil here, but viewers should know that Villeneuve's film is not the crowd pleaser of The Martian, Ridley Scott's big TIFF premiere last year. It's a movie designed to simultaneously challenge viewers, move them and get them talking. For the most part, it succeeds. Amy Adams gives a confident, affecting performance as Louise, a linguistics expert brought in on the day that 12 unidentified flying objects enter Earth's orbit. Despite what they're telling the public, which is not much of anything at first, the governments of the world have made first contact with the creatures inside, beings that look vaguely like some higher power merged an octopus with a giant hand. Working with the military and a scientist named Ian, Jeremy Renner, Louise seeks to find the answer to a very simple question: what do you want? The heptapods, as they're eventually called, speak in sounds that echo whale noises at times, but Louise quickly learns that written language is the way to communicate, even deciphering the complex way the interstellar tourists write. As she gets closer and closer to being able to convey that crucial question in a way that it, and its answer, will be understood, the world's uneasiness continues. Will man's protective instinct kick in before its science and language leaders can figure out a way to stop it? Louise also has darkness in her life. The opening scenes detail the birth, brief life, and death of a child. Throughout, Adams imbues Louise with a quiet, effective emotional undercurrent that's essential to the film's success. This is a movie that gets too sterile at times, but Adams is always there to ground it. Villeneuve's vision is not particularly CGI heavy, allowing Adams to work in a way that feels relatable. There's so much going on in this character's mind and heart, especially in the twisty final act, with which Adams could have gone big, but it's actually one of the more subtle and internal sci-fi movie performances that I've ever seen. And it's a testament to the success of Arrival that it's her face, not the impressive alien ship/creature design that people will remember. As he has recently, Villeneuve understands the importance of surrounding himself with talented people. In this case, Two of the film's undeniable MVPs are cinematographer Bradford Young, the genius who shot Selma and A Most Violent Year, and composer Johan Johansson. The latter's compositions here are essential to every emotional beat of the film, defining the air of tension in the first half of the film and the moving undercurrents of the final act. Young's approach is beautifully tactile, using the natural world to make this unnatural story genuine. We may not be able to fully relate to Louise's narrative, but we can appreciate the image of a child running through a field. Young's imagery is fluid, unlike the choppy blockbuster cinematography that we're used to seeing in sci-fi. Most importantly, it feels like everything here is of one vision: cinematography, direction, acting, score, etc., instead of the factory-produced blockbusters we've seen of late. Despite all of that, Arrival sags a bit in the middle, a point when it may lose some viewers for good. The first contact act is undeniably confident and the final thematically purposeful scenes of the film are stunningly ambitious, but the pace of Arrival softens a bit too much in the middle and one notices the sterility of the piece overall. Without spoiling anything, maintaining the shock value of the twists of the final act forces some narrative decisions in the midsection that keep us observers to the action of the film when we're ready to be participants. Villeneuve is a talented director, but this movie lacks a degree of heat that would have helped it hit the emotional and philosophical beats of the final scenes. As is, we often feel like we're behind the barrier that Louise uses when communicating with the alien creatures she dubs Abbott and Costello. Like she wants to do, we so want to take off the equipment and get behind that screen. Having said that, this is ambitious, accomplished filmmaking that deserves an audience. It's a film that forces viewers to reconsider that which makes us truly human, and the impact of grief on that timeline of existence. At its best, and largely through Adam's performance, the film proposes that we've all had those days in which communication breaks down and fear over the unknown sets in. And it is the best of us who persevere, get up from being knocked down and repair that which is broken. This may be what struck me most about this film, is how brilliantly it captures not just the theme and heart of the story that communication with aliens will be alien, it will be difficult, and it will fundamentally change us. It also manages to capture the experience of reading the story, which is nonlinear, written in second-person point of view, and which ought to have been unfilmable. The film is, appropriately, the story translated. You might, as I did, cry not just at the heart of the story but at the miracle of its impossible adaptation. The story, a talented linguist, Louise Banks is called on to help initiate communication with the aliens on board a mysterious craft that has stationed itself in Montana, one of 12 that have landed all over the world. Partnered with a wry astrophysicist and overseen by an increasingly paranoid military, Louise must find a way to communicate with the heptapods, a species so fundamentally different from us that at first there seems no real basis of engagement. Until she begins writing, and they write back. Soon after, Louise starts having visions. Or are they memories? Or maybe even prophecy? In fact, the film opens with the history of Louis and her daughter Hannah, who dies tragically young. Only as the story progresses do we realize that history hasn't happened yet. As Louise's understanding of heptapod writing increases, her perception of time and space changes. It's not so much that she sees the future. Rather, she begins to experience her entire life simultaneously. Thus begins a race to see if Louise can convey and use what she has learned before human governments and military forces engage in typically stupid bouts of violence in the name of defense and safety. Story of Your Life, first published in 1998 and winner of the Nebula and Sturgeon Awards, is one of the most talked about short stories of the last 20 years. The film is a worthy adaptation, and joins a small but significant list of peaceful first contact movies: The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Contact, all of which are some of my very favorite science fiction movies of all time. The primary cast, Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Forrest Whitaker, are understated and solid. Louise reminded me of two other woman scientists in cerebral science fiction films, Ryan Stone in Gravity, and Ellie Arroway in Contact. All driven, passionate, intelligent, career-focused women, enough alike that it seems like a trope, one I could probably delve more into across both written and film science fiction. I'll just focus on these 3 movies. Gravity drove me a little bananas because despite its riveting focus on the difficulties of surviving in space, carried by an engaging woman character, by the end of the story it was abundantly clear that the grand adventure was primarily a metaphor for surviving grief, particularly the poignant grief of a mother for the death of her child. I wanted space adventure, and the grief seemed cliché. It wasn't the story I wanted. I brought friends to Arrival who had not read Story of Your Life. So, unfamiliar with the source material and what they were getting into, they assumed the scenes of Louise and Hannah were flashbacks. They were fully immersed in the trope and trained to read Louise as a mother who has drowned her grief in her work. Only as the film progressed did they realize, these aren't flashbacks. The child hasn't been born yet. I was delighted to see that along with everything else it does, Arrival neatly overturns audience expectations of a trope that was played with such melodrama in Gravity. Arrival can be viewed as a metaphor for grief as inescapable, but rather than subsuming the science-fictional conceit, the metaphor here is absolutely dependent on it. They're intertwined, not interchangeable. Arrival is a rather obvious successor to Contact, and Ellie Arroway a conceptual ancestor for Louise Banks. But rather than seeking out alien contact as Arroway has, Banks is thrown into it. And while Contact offers a benevolent, literally patriarchal, the alien Ellie makes contact with takes the form of her father, imagining of advanced alien races who understand us, are looking for us, and will shepherd us into greater understanding of the universe. Arrival presents a much less comforting scenario. The heptapods are so alien as to almost be outside our comprehension. I want to mention here that the heptapods are beautiful. Their movements are believable, built out of whatever serves them as bone and muscle and sinew, with visible joints and sensible mechanics. Most importantly, they aren't typical Hollywood CG phantasms. They aren't designed to elicit a specific reaction from the audience, whether fear, or revulsion or attraction. They simply are. This is the first contact movie I've seen that demonstrates just how amazingly difficult communicating with aliens is likely to be. Most films present aliens as invaders, conquerors, or would-be benevolent overlord scenarios we understand because humanity has done those things itself. But to communicate with beings who have an entirely different outlook of time and space? Beings who present the concept of gift but the linguists interpret it as weapon because that's what humanity is looking for and fears. And yet, the film, like the best peaceful first contact movies, unabashedly declares that attempting such communication is worthwhile and necessary and must be done with peace as the desired outcome. I imagine some fans of the short story will be annoyed at the intrusion of the larger world, politics, and paranoia into Louise's personal story. The addition of a plot about the Chinese government steering violent confrontation and the explosive sabotage planted by a disaffected soldier recalling the act of sabotage at about the same point in the plot in Contact, this was the Hollywoodization we were worried about. But the addition of the wider world was necessary to expand such an intimate short story to the size and scope of an A-list Hollywood movie. It doesn't betray the story's core. The exploration of time and emotion remain. The bulk of the film focuses on Louise, on her hands as she squeezes a tremor out of them, on her eyes as she encounters the heptapods, and as her gaze turns inward on some tangled thought. The film is more intimate than not, beginning and ending with her voice. Arrival gives us what we desperately need now, a mainstream movie featuring scientist characters in a story that celebrates problem solving in the name of peace and exploration, part of a trend that continues what we saw in Interstellar and The Martian. I hope Arrival is wildly successful and this trend of intellectual, accessible, problem-solving science fiction in mainstream movies continues. The very best directors can do anything. They aren't just locked in on a single genre, they master multiple essential ones. They also aren't filmmaking slaves to a single franchise. While they may operate within a franchise from time to time, Like Alfonso Cuarón did with Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, they don't dedicate their careers to them. In 2017, director Denis Villeneuve will have made his first franchise film with Blade Runner 2049, a sequel to the Ridley Scott science fiction classic. Villeneuve isn't a household name for the general moviegoing public, but for film buffs he is one of the most recognized newer talents. I haven't yet been lucky enough to watch many of his early Canadian films, but I have been able to watch everything he has made in the 2010s. Before Incendies, Villeneuve wasn't even a blip on my radar, but that film put him on the map, so to speak. With Incendies, Villeneuve made a heartbreaking film with an unbelievable climax. Honestly, even though I am a Dane, I believe Villeneuve and Canada were robbed of the Best Foreign Language Film Award at the 83rd Academy Awards when Denmark and Susanne Bier won the Oscar for In a Better World. At the time of writing, Denis Villeneuve hasn't made a French-Canadian film since Incendies, but he hasn't lost his ability to entertain and amaze audiences. 2013 was a great year for Villeneuve, as two films that he directed were released, Enemy and Prisoners. Villeneuve went from making a heartbreaking drama to making two strong thrillers. In 2015, Villeneuve then graduated to making a cynical crime drama, Sicario, that was sadly overlooked when the nominees for Best Picture at the 88th Academy Awards were announced. I don't usually take this long to introduce the director of a film, when I'm reviewing a film. But after having seen Arrival, I feel that Villeneuve deserves more recognition. I believe that he hasn't made a false move as a director since I started following his career this decade. That includes Arrival, which I believe is easily one of the best science fiction films of this decade, and one of the best films of the year. For a very long time, I considered reading the short story, which Arrival is based on, before watching the film. Ultimately, I decided against it as I didn't want any aspect of a Villeneuve film spoiled for me, as I believe they are some of the most engaging and interesting films being made this decade. Arrival isn't all that different from what Villeneuve has made before, even though it is his first science fiction film as far as I'm aware. You see, while Arrival is an alien encounter film, it isn't the classic alien invasion blockbuster film. Earlier this year, Independence Day, Resurgence saw humankind defending Earth from vicious aliens, and if that is the kind of film you're expecting from Arrival, then think again. Arrival isn't a bloated, action-packed, science fiction franchise starter. No, Arrival is, instead, a smart and challenging science fiction film that might be surprisingly understated to some. It tells a story about how we, on a planet with no person able to speak for every nation, might greet and communicate with aliens that suddenly arrive, so to speak. The central character in the film isn't the President of the United States or some soldier. Instead, the film follows a professor of linguistics as she tries to understand these aliens and find out why they've arrived now. There is much more to this film, but to write about those elements in this spoiler-free review wouldn't be right, as Arrival does a fantastic job of really making you question how you view everything in the film at one crucial point. It might be a slow burn, but there is a significant and pleasing payoff in the thrilling and thought-provoking final act. The film makes a lot of really important points about teamwork, cooperation, and communication, but those points aren't really what make you think in the final act or after you leave the theater. That's all I can say here. If I were to point out which previous Villeneuve film Arrival reminded me of the most, it might actually be Enemy, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. I wouldn't have thought that before I watched the film, but it does make a lot of sense. Of the films that I had seen Villeneuve do prior to Arrival, Enemy was definitely the toughest film to understand. I love Enemy a lot more than a lot of people do, and while that film is a psychological thriller, I do think Arrival shares certain traits with Enemy. In fact, there's a certain scene in Arrival, wherein they discuss the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that any fan of Enemy will recognize from that film. I loved the way the film was shot. Villeneuve usually teams up with Roger Deakins, a legendary cinematographer, but the Arrival cinematographer is actually Bradford Young, one of the newer talents in that filmmaking position. Young has previously worked on Ava DuVernay's Selma, and he is apparently going to be teaming up with Phil Lord and Chris Miller on Lucasfilm's Han Solo spin-off film. I also feel like I need to mention the wonderfully eerie and atmospheric musical score that the Icelandic composer Jóhann Jóhannsson made for this film. These scenes would be effective without it, but the score adds something quite indescribable to the film. I think that one of the wonderful moments in the film is when Amy Adams' character first sees the aliens. She is clearly shaken by the experience, and when that scene was over, I realized just how effective that scene was. It shook me too. The music builds when the helicopter that she is in lands by one of the spacecrafts, and that's just one of the other wonderful scenes where the music really adds a lot to the film. I also need to talk about Amy Adams, who gives one of her best performances yet in Arrival. She masterfully plays a very capable and curious character, and she gives the standout performance here. It is pretty amazing how much Amy Adams has grown as an actress. I vividly remember the smile she put on my face in her first big film as the innocent and giddy Brenda in Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can. Now, Adams is one of Hollywood's best leading ladies. This brings me to the things that I didn't like, and there isn't a lot to get to here. While I think both Jeremy Renner and Forest Whitaker do fine jobs here, I have issues with both of them. I'm not sure what kind of accent Whitaker was going for here, but it took me out of the film at one point. Renner plays a theoretical physicist, but if you somehow missed that, then I don't blame you. Renner's character doesn't do a lot, really. The final problem I had with the film itself was that there was this one soldier that went rogue because of political propaganda he watched on television. The character doesn't do much else before going rogue, but what he does changes the film in a pretty significant way, and I didn't feel like it was particularly realistic that he would have had the chance to go rogue. I'm really trying to not spoil anything, which is difficult, so I'll leave it at that. I clearly loved Arrival, and, now that I've thought it over a little bit, I think that it might be my favorite Denis Villeneuve film yet. It also might be my favorite alien encounter film of all time. I do think it's a film you need to watch more than once, and I look forward to getting that chance at some point in the future. Denis Villeneuve's 2016 film Arrival had been on my list for quite some time before I finally settled into it yesterday. Though I'd seen the trailers boasting Jóhann Jóhannsson's dark cinematography and I'd heard about Amy Adams' superb performance, no surprise here that she dazzled me. As always, I had not read any spoilers about the film and was therefore shocked at the extent to which it flipped so many of my expectations. Arrival's world is a bleak and mysterious one. Even Louise's, Adams', spectacular home seems perennially dark, and her fondest, most beautiful memories of her daughter are touched with a bluish Ozark-like tint. Everything in the film boils down to its themes of existential anxiety and the promise of eventual death for Louise's daughter, for humanity, and even for the immense heptapods. Furthermore, the motif of unwelcome foreign invasion permeates even the most real-world aspects of Arrival. Louise's daughter, Hannah, for instance, dies of a rare disease that appears to be some sort of cancer. The heptapods are not the only foreign invaders in this film. This pattern is present even in Louise's interactions with the creatures, when they invade her thoughts with their black, squid-like ink. Villeneuve and Jiang's, Ted Chiang wrote the short story Arrival is based on, called Story of Your Life. Reimagination of what an alien invasion might look like is postmodern and minimalistic. The space shuttles, for instance, are dark, shadow-like semicircles that we only come to recognize as flying saucers at the end, when they turn on their sides and eventually disintegrate. Visual choices like this one contain elements of classic, Cold War-era sci-fi film, but Arrival's space shuttles are updated for modern audiences who are by now desensitized to the flashing lights and indecipherable technology of aliens a la The Day the Earth Stood Still, Wise, 1951. After decades of the same tropes about aliens, we now need something darker, unfamiliar, and more ominous to elicit uncertainty or dread. For this reason, much about the heptapod saucers remains unexplained. There is no exposition scene that explains the laws of gravity inside the saucers. Sometimes characters can stand, other times they float, how the military knows how to enter them, or what exactly the screen is between where the humans stand and where the aliens live. Furthermore, there is a tremendous incongruity between what the ship's size appears to be from the outside and what it actually is on the inside. How big are these ships, exactly? And perhaps most baffling, how do these tremendous heptapods manage to fit inside such seemingly slim structures? Very little is explained for us in this film, and that is what makes it so unnerving. Indeed, I have seen it listed with other horror films of this cinematic generation such as The Witch, Eggers, 2015, It Follows, Mitchell, 2015, and The Babadook, Kent, 2014. Although Arrival is certainly not a horror film itself, it is predicated on fear and existential dread. Villeneuve provides us with piecemeal information just enough for us to cling loosely to this multi-layered, non-linear narrative, but presented in a manner that inevitably leaves us just as disoriented as the cinematography within the space shuttle does. In short, Arrival sets its tone by letting its visuals, its haunting soundtrack, and its actors' subtle physicality do the talking. And the sum of these parts amounts to a core human fear, a nihilistic sense of meaninglessness, in terms of both our individual lives and our species as a whole. Arrival suggests that our lives are out of our control. After all, the heptapods demonstrate to Louise what Einstein told us decades ago, that time is nonlinear. The past, present, and future are happening to us simultaneously, on planes just out of our reach and far beyond our understanding. We perceive time as linear for our own sanity, a quality which seems to unravel for Louise as the heptapods drop visions of the future into her mind. Arrival, once again, is not a horror film, but it belongs in the same conversation as its horror counterparts precisely because of its exploration of our universal temporal/existential nightmare. My final note on this film is its political context. Marketed and released in the shadow of the 2016 presidential election that Donald Trump infamously won, Arrival calls into question the solidity of the American government as well as international diplomacy. At one point, Agent Halpern, played by Michael Stuhlbarg, tells Louise, "We're a world with no single leader," and his words carry meaning beyond the story's alien invasion and even beyond the film itself. As the global community transitions from solidarity to stubborn individualism, I cannot help but think of the seemingly impenetrable world of international relations and the impossible process of creating and enforcing global agreements. I was also equal parts intrigued and amused by the global powers mentioned in the film and the way they reacted to the heptapods' invasion. China, for instance, is the first nation to settle on aggression against the aliens, and its military leader, General Shang, belligerently resists any talks of peace. At the same time, the Russian government kills one of its own in order to retain the security of government information. This struck me as more than coincidental for a movie released in the midst of controversy over a possible, and, alas, eventual, trade war with China, as well as concern over Russia's secrecy and its handling of information. The only other countries named as particularly aggressive and uncooperative as the film heads to its climax are Pakistan and Sudan, both of whom have also had strained relations with the United States over the past decade over concerns of terrorism and national security. Arrival's grounding in contemporary politics is not unique, see Melanie McAllister's analyses of American films on the Middle East, but what struck me is Villeneuve's subtle handling of international relationships and the attention he gave to the disparate concerns over each of these countries. The United States military, by contrast, is characterized as warlike and misogynistic. Leaders constantly talk down to Louise even when asking for her expertise when the heptapods first arrive. They belittle her, question her conclusions, and override her decisions, making this movie in many ways a classic story of men mansplaining to an intelligent, qualified woman in the workplace. Let us note that Rebecca Solnit coined the term mansplaining just 2 years before this film came out, and, once again, that Arrival hit theaters in the wake of the Clinton-Trump debates. The American military also makes the decision to bomb the inside of the heptapod saucer while Louise and Ian, played by Jeremy Renner, are in it. This epitomizes the brash American cowboy trope that defines how Americans are received and portrayed internationally. In fact, it reminded me of the way Americans are characterized in Eye of the Sky, Hood, 2014, valuing violence over communication, fully aware of yet apathetic to the potentially tragic consequences of their hasty decisions. Americans are also portrayed in both films as painfully arrogant, exemplified most potently in Arrival when Colonel Weber, played by Forrest Whitaker, referred to Europeans as a more advanced race than Australian Aborigines. Although in saying this he implied that the heptapods were more advanced than humans, his military position and combative attitude against the heptapods implies that he still believed in the potential of American military superiority. His words also demonstrated his belief in Western, in this case, read, white, superiority over indigenous peoples, an ironic and baffling thing for a black character to say. It is not hard to understand why Arrival made Steven Schneider's 1001 Movies to See Before You Die. It is not only a compelling exploration of what first contact might look like in today's America, but it also sheds light on the political, social, and existential undercurrents that haunt the contemporary psyche. While the film's nonlinear plot structure was intriguing and thematically appropriate, my only complaint is that it made the film exhausting to follow at times. This is its chief flaw, though this complexity and the intellectual endurance it calls for does, admittedly, make the ending all the more satisfying and all the more terrifying. Denis Villeneuve's Arrival is an intellectually rigorous science fiction film that'll make you cry. That's no easy feat. Most hard science fiction films are full of ideas, but light on emotion and don't even try for catharsis. They want to dazzle our brains, not our hearts. The king of hard sci-fi, 2001, A Space Odyssey, instills the viewer with awe, but its most emotional character is an artificial intelligence program. It's not a 3 Kleenex weepa. Only a few films, like Robert Zemeckis' Contact and Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, manage to be about big ideas while also touching us in more intimate ways. We can now put Arrival alongside those two films as a rare example of hard science fiction that looks beyond the human pale while also fundamentally being about the choices we make in our lives and the reasons we have for living. It's a beautiful film, as formally precise as you'd expect from Villeneuve, but as touching and even transcendent as a Terrence Malick film. The central figure of Arrival is Amy Adams Louise Banks. After 12 alien spacecrafts arrive around the globe, the U.S. Army recruits Louise to learn how to communicate with the aliens so they can determine their motives for coming to Earth. She's paired with Ian Donnelly, Jeremy Renner, an astrophysicist, and together they strive to learn to communicate with the visitors before rival nations like China aggressively act to defend the planet. As Louise begins to learn the aliens' language, she starts to comprehend the world differently. Memories of her daughter's life and untimely death begin to haunt her more frequently. Based on Ted Chiang's Story of Your Life, Arrival posits the idea that language shapes how we think. The thesis goes that instead of merely being a tool for communication, language actually shapes our reality. Instead of manipulating narration and tense like the short story does, Villeneuve accomplishes this argument by manipulating cinematic language. Flashbacks, sound design, and repetitive editing all add up to a grand statement about life late in the film. Aside from its intellectual and emotional heft, Arrival is simply an excellent formal work. It is terrifically shot by Selma cinematographer Bradford Young and again utilizes the audio prowess of composer Johan Johansson and sound editor Sylvain Belmar. The introductory scenes of the alien spacecraft are perfect examples of Villeneuve's craft. Villeneuve thrives off tension. Like in Sicario and Prisoners, every new shot in Arrival extends the tension of the last. His camera is almost always moving, slowly pushing in on the actors and subconsciously twisting our nerves. In the early minutes of the film, Villeneuve hides any clear view of the alien ships. Instead, he builds up anticipation as we're left to watch characters staring gobsmacked at hidden screens depicting this historic event. Only when Louise is escorted by helicopter to the military base in Montana beneath the craft do we see it in its entirety. In an extreme wide shot, the helicopter approaches the spacecraft, which looks like a gargantuan black egg, halved vertically. Mist clouds the air and Johansson's horns blare out a pulsing tone. The moment is awe-inspiring. Later, when Louise and Ian board the craft, Villeneuve shows every step in their journey from base to craft. He shows them getting immunization boosters, gearing up in hazmat suits, and loading into trucks. When they get to the ship, the camera seems to crawl across the stark walls of the alien vessel, slowly pushing towards the blinding white light at the top. He stretches out the introduction as long as possible. As the characters use a hydraulic lift to enter the ship, the gravity starts to shift and they find themselves able to walk vertically up the walls. In one of the year's most remarkable shots, the characters jump from a standing position on the lift and shift midair to a standing position on the wall, perpendicular to the lift. Villeneuve doesn't cut in the midst of the jump. Instead, the gravity reorients in the midst of the camera move, making the effect all the more stunning. We're left dazzled and wondering how they possibly could have pulled it off. Arrival is full of this kind of precise, stunning filmmaking. It's a film made by a master craftsman full of ideas that are genuinely profound. If you're able to go along with its central conceit, Arrival will prove of the year's most rewarding films. We are, it seems to me, living in a great day for science fiction movies. Rather than solely having to subsist on massive, operatic space battles, which, don't get me wrong, can be great, we also get thinking science fiction. We get movies that ask what it is to be human and whether that's changing. Movies that ask, at least pseudo-scientifically, what it might be like to be the sole inhabitant of another planet, and now a film that asks what might happen if aliens actually arrive and neither we nor the aliens instantly start blasting. This last entry is the new film from director Denis Villeneuve. Arrival, which features Amy Adams, Forrest Whitaker, and Jeremy Renner, is quite a feat. Its focus is the obvious language barrier that occurs when 12 alien ships land here on Earth. Adams Louise Banks is a linguist and finds herself brought to the one spaceship which landed on U.S. soil by Whitaker's Colonel Weber. Working with scientist Ian Donnelly, Renner, Banks puts together a plan to communicate with the beings which resemble an octopus but with only 7 legs, and at the same time has to explain to the military, and therefore us, just why she is approaching it in the manner she has chosen. It is the back and forth between Banks and the aliens which is the single most fascinating aspect of the film. She is ushered into their ship, which has its own gravity setup, and finds the aliens behind this clear wall, emerging through mist. Not only does she nearly keep her cool, but she actually manages to make headway and does so despite the location, odd schedule the aliens maintain, and constant questioning by her supervisors who are anxious for answers. Arrival is perhaps best described as intellectual filmmaking. It definitely has an emotional aspect, one which I would argue is the single weakest element of the film, particularly the movie's postscript, but it mainly keeps the viewer at an emotional arm's length, delving into process and progress, not feelings. And now that I've said that, I'll walk it back a little. There is definitely an emotional core, hence the ability for that postscript to exist, which is why the movie opens with the sad story of Banks' daughter, but it is feeling that is deeply wrapped inside thinking. Villeneuve walls us off from emotion, much in the same way as Banks. The pacing is no small part of this either. The movie is at once both urgent and slow. Whitaker and the government need to know what is happening with the aliens, why they are there, what are the other ships telling people in other countries, what do the aliens want. Banks, though, won't be rushed, can't be rushed. For her, the process of learning to speak to the aliens is going to take as long as it takes. There is nothing that can be done to make it happen more quickly. As the movie methodically approaches its conclusion, and as Banks learns to communicate with the aliens, which come to be known as heptapods, more and more effectively, the sense of urgency only grows. Perhaps it has been slowly building from the beginning, but as the conclusion approaches, the tension which exists on multiple levels is palpable. By the time the whole thing ends, the viewer simply wants to go back and watch it all from the beginning to see what they missed, to see if it all makes more sense, and to wonder at everything from the beauty of the sound design to the structure of the ship to the great performance given by Adams. With Arrival, Villeneuve takes this big idea, the arrival of aliens, and strips it down to a couple of core questions, making it something small and manageable and just as important. Added to it then are some fine actors realistically portraying what the experience of a scientist in that situation might actually be. The result is a film that makes one think, makes one wonder, and makes one question just how poorly our world would actually react in such a situation. It has been almost 40 years since Steven Spielberg made Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's not a Spielberg film that people tend to revisit the way they do Jaws or Raiders or E.T. in its time, though. Close Encounters cast a spell of majestic awe that still reverberates through pop culture. There have, of course, been any number of alien visitation films since, but whenever one comes along, Contact, Signs, District 9, Interstellar, Spielberg's own The War of the Worlds, it always feels, at the time, like a major event, and then in hindsight it ends up seeming like a rerun. Close Encounters, with its obsessiveness and mystery, its spaceship of light that seemed as big as a city, is still the film that set the template that made the prospect of an extraterrestrial visit look as wondrous and eccentric and ominous and spectacular as we imagined it might be. So you have to say this for Arrival, a solemnly fantastic tale of a highly enigmatic alien visit that premiered today at the 73rd International Venice Film Festival. The film has been made, by the intensely gifted director Denis Villeneuve, with an awareness that we've already been through this more than enough times, and that the definition of an alien movie, or, at least, one that's trying to be a serious piece of sci-fi, and not just a popcorn lark like Independence Day, is that it's going to hypnotize us with something that appears extraordinary because it's altogether unprecedented. For a while, Arrival succeeds in doing that. Villeneuve, the director, or Sicario and Prisoners, has made a grounded, deep-dish authenticity his calling card, and in the early scenes of Arrival he hooks us by playing the news of spaceships hovering over Earth in the most low-key, randomly unsensational way possible. There are TV anchors blaring news reports in the background, a dulling sense of chaos and fear, but mostly we're taking it all in through the eyes of Dr. Louise Banks, Amy Adams, a linguistics professor who has to cut her class short and then wanders through the parking lot in a daze. Then an army colonel shows up in her office to recruit her help, but instead of the usual blustery movie military officer, he's played by Forrest Whitaker tossing out lines in a croaky semi-whisper, which turns out to be a lot more intriguing. He then plays a recording of the attempt that has been made so far to communicate with the aliens, who respond with what sound like the voices of whales. It's all very spooky and captivating. The aliens have parked spaceships in 12 locations around the world, including America, Russia, China, and Pakistan, and Louise is taken to the one in the United States, a vast green meadow in Montana, surrounded by hills and rolling clouds, where the ship hovers like a silent, mile-high version of a smooth obsidian egg that's been cut in two. The images are stately and vast, with an almost super-earthly clarity. It's Louise's job to draw on her language skills to find a way to communicate with the aliens, and to that end she's teamed with Dr. Ian Connolly, Jeremy Renner, a theoretical physicist with a cut-and-dried view of things. Renner's role is rather modest, and he looks almost sheepish about it, but Adams draws on her gift for making each and every moment quiver with discovery. The actress is alive to what's around her, even when it's just ordinary, and when it's extraordinary the inner fervor she communicates is quietly transporting. Villeneuve builds our anticipation with great flair, as the two world experts stand beneath the ship, waiting for it to open. They are then ushered into what looks like an abandoned elevator shaft with walls made of carbon, where gravity disappears. They walk straight up and sideways. At last they come to a rectangle of light, which turns out to be a clear pane behind which the aliens appear, shrouded in billows of smoky white. Do I even have to say spoiler alert? Discovering what the aliens in Arrival look like, sound like, and how they communicate is the dramatic heart and soul of the picture, a drama of elegantly hushed and heightened anticipation that Villeneuve stages with maximum cunning. No, The aliens aren't anthropomorphic creatures who speak in subtitles. They are tall black squid-like figures with 7 spindly legs at least. That's what they look like from the bottom. For a long time, we don't see their top halves, and those legs, up close, look like giant bony hands with their fingers pointed down and planted on a table. They're dubbed heptapods, and to talk, this is the movie's single coolest invention. One of their digits will point up, opening into a squishy 7-pointed star that emits what looks like black smoke, or squid ink, into the air. The smoke then forms into a circular ink blot, a word. It's Louise's job to decipher that language, so that she can ask them the all-important question, why on earth have you come here? All this time, there's a relatively conventional brink of war drama transpiring in the background, ratcheted up by internet paranoia and a Rush Limbaugh-like figure barking away on YouTube. Given that the whole global military thing has been at the forefront of virtually every alien invasion thriller, you're grateful that it is in the background. Unfortunately, it doesn't stay there. Villeneuve has just figured out a way to hold off the conventionality by downplaying it for a while. As intriguing as the alien language is, a cross between hieroglyphs and smoke signals, the way that Louise actually starts to comprehend it is murky and abstract. She acquires a primitive vocabulary of circular signs, at which point the aliens seem willing to communicate their big message, which is something to the effect of offer weapon. It's not at all clear what that means, but one is fairly certain they're not trying to sell advanced military hardware to Lockheed Martin. In the tradition of Close Encounters, these seem like peacenik aliens. Otherwise, why wouldn't they just attack? True to its title, Arrival makes an absorbing spectacle of the initial alien setup, alternately stoking and sating our curiosity. The aliens don't quite have personalities, but there's still something tender and touching about them. There are also, frankly, elements of familiarity. The sounds they low blasting moans louder than a pipe organ echo the sounds made by the ship in Close Encounters. When we first see the aliens' squid-like legs, they look a lot like the alien tentacles in the War of the Worlds, and the more closely we look at them, the more they look like gigantic versions of E.T.'s fingers. The point being that even though Villeneuve is a bold filmmaker, when it comes to this subject, Spielberg's vision is hard to get away from. It still somehow infuses everything. As the audience gets used to the aliens, the film enters a zone where it needs to do something more with them, something charged and fascinating. Instead, it does two things that are less than that. First, it begins to fall back on the military showdown cliches, as China, acting alone, makes a decision to draw a line in the stratospheric sand, announcing that it will now greet the aliens with force. Can the world work together? One hopes, in this sort of event, that it could, but that situation has been played out in movies before. The second wayward idea is that the alien language, all of those circle words, turns out to be their great gift to Earth. The movie plays off the notion that if you learn a new language, it can rewire the way you think. The alien language offers such a kick of rewiring that it actually alters the nature of time. The audience's reaction to this is likely to fall somehow on the spectrum between whoa and huh. In Arrival, it's a muddled idea, intriguing but not really developed. Yet the film ties it in with a backstory that frames the action, about Louise and the daughter who, in an extended prologue, she watched grow into adulthood and die. There's a surprise circularity to the structure of Arrival that some may find pleasing, but there's also a circular logic to it. The aliens have come to offer a weapon, which isn't really a weapon, it's a new way to order time, but the only one it seems to apply to is Louise, which makes the whole purpose of their visit seem an awfully far-fetched conceit. At its best, Arrival has an eerie grandeur, but if the film starts off as Neo Spielberg, it winds up as Neo Christopher Nolan meets Neo Terrence Malick. It turns into an ersatz mind-bender. You feel you've had a close encounter with what might have been an amazing movie, but not actual contact. The sci-fi genre is truly a competitive field. Sometimes many films go over the top with their interpretation of alien encounters. Nevertheless, I was genuinely amazed when I watched Arrival. It's a well-worked piece of movie making and takes you into another sphere of plot experience. With slight traits from Ridley Scott's Alien, Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and H.G. Wells' classic tale The War of the Worlds, Arrival was an in-depth exploration in what alien contact could be like, and it certainly excelled in that aspect. With direction by the talented Denis Villeneuve, Arrival is based on a short tale, Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. The main focus of the plot revolves around Dr. Louise Banks, played diligently by Amy Adams. Her life seems to be a daze of haunting memories and poignant experiences about her dead daughter, which seem to go on and on, like a never-ending dream from which she cannot awake. The pain they represent eat away at her in her present-day life. But Dr. Louise Banks tries to put these sore memories aside by concentrating on her occupation in teaching and education. She is also sympathetic to her students, maybe she sees them as part of the child she lost. I have to say Amy Adams is an exceptional actress. She's great in her role as Dr. Louise Banks and gives a performance of outstanding purpose and emotional outpouring. When the aliens arrive for the first time in the skies, displayed to the world on our television screens, humanity goes into a state of panic. And we are left wondering if a full-scale military encounter can be avoided between the squabbling nations of the planet Earth and our out-of-this-world guests. The aliens are called heptapods. They're an insect type, octopus-like creature, and the appearance of them is unsettling at first sight, with their strange-shaped hands, and a vulgarity to the rest of their form that perpetuates menace. The only way they seem able to communicate with mankind are through an intricate form of artistic numeric shapes and hieroglyphs, smearing them against a screen of transparent glass. I found there was a more restrained attitude within Arrival, unlike others in its ilk. There's no massive battles scenes, no destruction of cities with the inevitable exploding buildings and natural disasters, and no exploding spaceships darting amongst the Earth's atmosphere. I thought this approach helped a lot with the grounding component of Arrival's narrative. With a top-notch stellar cast, including Forrest Whitaker, as the stern, no-nonsense armed forces commander, Michael Stuhlbarg as the interfering government official, Tzi Ma as General Shang, and a creepy musical score by the talented Johan Johansson, the movie edged along with a measured degree of intensity and threat. Arrival delves deeply into the contact aspect between aliens and mankind as Dr. Louise Banks, Amy Adams, an expert in language communication, is called upon by the authorities to work on various translation techniques to understand and befriend the heptapods. She does this with a varied degree of success, but there are the military generals of the world in the background, wanting her to fail in her task. And in reality most of them are nothing more than a bunch of trigger-happy warmongers. And so, when we look at ourselves in the world today, with the permanent destruction that surrounds us, be it war, or the financial state of the faltering banks, it does make me wonder what indeed would happen if we had to join forces to combat an alien threat. I think Arrival gets the balance right. Mankind would probably be ineffective. We'd spend all of our time trying to destroy each other instead of preventing our own destruction or annihilation. Arrival is a mature and naturally handsome sci-fi movie. At times it captured the real heart of what communication may ultimately be like between us and an alien force if this occurrence transpired around the skies of our fragile planet Earth, and how humanity would probably fail to have any kind of cohesive response. Maybe the real enemy wouldn't be from aliens if they appeared from space, but from mankind's own stupidity, recklessness, and megalomania. Denis Villeneuve's elegant sci-fi thriller, Arrival, contains one of the most deeply thoughtful messages of any film this year. Like Villeneuve's breakthrough masterpiece, Incendies, the central message is a desperate call for solidarity. While Incendies addressed how absurd it is to hate on one another based on religious differences, Arrival pleads for the unification of humanity through world peace among nations and races. The film couldn't be timelier. This isn't your ordinary alien invasion film. In fact, Arrival is more interested in asking questions about us than them. So many world conflicts stem from miscommunication. The slightest misunderstanding could have dire consequences, be it between races, nations, individuals, or in this case, intergalactic visitors. Instead of jumping to conclusions and taking action, the film argues we should converse more clearly. Emotional transparency is vital in creating a deeper connection amongst one another. What I find most fascinating is how Villeneuve communicates the importance of clarity of language through the universal and visual language of film. Much of the film revolves around the public's desperate need to finding answers regarding the nature of the arrival. Are they tourists, invaders, or educators? As the mystery drags on, the world begins to fall into complete chaos. We live in a world that demands immediate answers, for we fear the unknown. Villeneuve sophisticatedly practices this notion by integrating it into his masterful filmmaking. He understands that less is more, and what we don't see is often scarier than what we do see. It takes the film nearly 30 minutes, for example, to reveal the alien spacecraft and its occupants. By teasing viewers with what is left out of the screen, Villeneuve grips viewers and forces us to use our imagination. We become as eager and impatient as the desperate characters in the film. When we do finally meet the extraterrestrials, it comes with a sense of wonder and awe. Amy Adams plays the linguistic specialist in charge of communicating with the aliens. Both the character and the actress herself understand the importance of body language in communication. Adams' performance evokes so much emotion without relying too heavily on dialogue. The subtlety of her acting gives this nuanced film a cumulative resonating emotional power. If she's the heart of the film, then Jeremy Renner is the brain, and Forrest Whitaker, the muscle. The former actor plays the role of a theoretical physicist, and the latter, an army general. Through their interactions, we encounter distinctively different approaches to a given situation. Apparently, director Denis Villeneuve and screenwriter Eric Heiserer created a fully functioning visual language for the aliens. Everything about the film feels plausible and well thought out. According to astrophysicist Andy Howell, the film does a great job at depicting physicists, linguists, and possible alien life. Grounded in reality, the devastating pace succeeds at unraveling an overwhelmingly awe-inspiring spectacle, which is no easy feat with genre audiences exposed to write about everything nowadays. I was reminded of the first time we took a glimpse at a dinosaur in Jurassic Park, the first appearance of the monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey, and the sweeping shot showcasing the Titanic from bow to stern. The poetic cinematography accompanied by Johan Johansson's haunting score is a thing to behold. What I found extraordinary about Arrival is how everything comes together nice and neatly at the end, or beginning. Let me explain. The structure of the plot itself is very well rounded, and I mean that in a very literal sense. The film explains how the aliens' perception of time is evident in the way they construct sentences and words. Unlike our linear way of writing, the aliens in the film write sentences in circular fashion. What that means is, the sentence has no beginning or end. Their awareness of time is correspondingly circular. Time for them is like a flat circle that constantly loops. There is no past, present, and future. The genius of Villeneuve is how he applies that to the structure of the actual film. Arrival has no beginning or end. Notice how the story begins where it ends, and ends where it begins. The film not only discusses complex theories about time, but also exemplifies it by creating a circular sequence of events. Embarking on the mounting steps of Villeneuve's hypnotic structure is assured to leave viewers spellbound. I watched Arrival, 2016, starring Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner last night. I'm doing some research for a short story I'm writing, and trying to talk to aliens is a big part of it. The original novel and screenplay were written by Ted Chiang, whose name I recognized because I recently reviewed his short story anthology Exhalation. I didn't like it very much, and I enjoyed the movie a lot better. I should say I even recognized the name of director Denis Villeneuve and, having looked him up, realized it was from his work on Blade Runner 2049, 2017. The movie isn't fast-paced at all, which makes sense if it's written by Chiang. He has the sort of mind that loves solving puzzles and delving into intellectual mysteries, but not so much a lot of explosions and car, or spaceship, chases. Big alien ships arrive at different points of the globe. Eventually, linguist Louise Banks, Adams, is teamed up with physicist Ian Donnelly, Renner, to go to the Montana site and attempt contact with them. Forrest Whitaker plays their military liaison Colonel Weber, who is trying to give them every type of help, but he's responsible for reporting to our military-industrial complex, so his hands are sort of tied. Banks gets the jump on linguists at the other global sites by introducing written language, since she doesn't have a hope of replicating their vocalizations. As information slowly becomes clearer, it seems as if the aliens want to pit the different nations against each other. The idea is that one world leader is easier to deal with than a whole bunch of them. That results in China's General Shang Xima shutting down communications with the rest of the teams and delivering an ultimatum to the aliens: leave our territory or go to war. Louise thinks there's a different interpretation. Part of that is based on her dreams and visions of her daughter Hannah. Forming a close bond with Ian, the two explore the alien language and thought, but ultimately, it's Louise who has to go it alone. In part this is due to a rogue group in the military who planted a bomb on the alien ship. The aliens save Louise and Ian just in time, but at the loss of one of their own. The ship rises half a mile overhead but doesn't leave. With all the other nations having broken off contact, and with China and several other countries on the verge of war, Louise is desperate to resolve the conflict. The aliens send a shuttle for her, and in her last contact with them, she learns everything else. The aliens do not experience time as linear, and as Louise has immersed herself in their language, her thoughts and dreams have also become unstuck in time. She remembers the future, and from that, knows what she has to do in the present by contacting Shang on his private number and saying something to him she learned only from a future memory. Once Shang de-escalates, so does the rest of the world, and what Louise learned ultimately brings humanity closer to unification. She had been remembering her future marriage to Ian, the daughter they had together, and her tragic terminal illness that will take her life at age 12. Somehow, that's all worth it though, and although we win, there's a tragic undertone to not only the ending but the entire movie. It's not exactly satisfying for that reason, but it forms a complete story that describes the fabric of life, the happy threads among the sad. I'm sure real linguists would watch this movie and point out all the mistakes, but I don't have that expertise. I was okay with the 1 hour, 56-minute experience, but couldn't have taken much more of "I love you Hannah but you're going to die." Before getting started with my review of Denis Villeneuve's Arrival, I would like to take a quick moment to address some website housekeeping. This review marks my 400th article on Cinephiles, this tiny blog I began almost 2 years ago. Incidentally, today also saw the site surpass 100,000 site views. I understand 100,000 seems minuscule in a worldwide internet environment, but given the large number of outlets for movie reviews and entertainment news online, it is a number I never expected to reach. I began Cinephiles on a whim to put my movie obsession to words. I didn't expect much from it, but it has provided me with opportunities that have been exciting and fulfilling. In short, I would like to extend my thanks to all of you who have indulged me in my cinematic passion. Whether this is the first time you have stumbled upon my site or you have become a frequent visitor, even if all you want is a letter grade for Arrival and you want me to shut up and get to the point, I thank you for your time. Arrival, on multiple levels, is a story about the understandings and misunderstandings inherent with language. The two language experts, Louise and Ian, Jeremy Renner, have a primary goal of communicating with the aliens, but they also must contend with a host of obstacles at the hands of interpersonal communication with government officials. The narrative of Arrival may not be what is expected from an alien invasion movie, but it is surprisingly compelling all the same. There is an intelligence to its determined slowness and sense of inevitability. Even ignoring the social commentary about a fragmented world that is inadequate in dealing with a global occurrence, which itself is quite effective, the story's fundamental building blocks are pretty great. One pivotal late movie plot reveal does lead to a questionable resolution, one that will certainly be divisive due to its ramifications on the whole of the plot. This said, there is enough that is tangibly intriguing before it to make it hard to dismiss the entire film. Speaking physically as opposed to tonally, the film is very dark. Places expected to be light are heavy in shadows. Places meant to be dark are lit soft and blue. This type of aesthetic can often come across as drab. Here, it is more fitting. It is ominous yet strangely non-threatening just as the towering alien craft appears from the outside. The introduction to the interior of the craft is cinematically full. Manipulations of depth and extreme long-shot scales create an environment that is intense. Absolutely beautiful cinematography makes a dark and empty space feel vibrant and full of emotion. Cinematographer Bradford Young does a magnificent job. The score of the film is similar. It is an intrusive element in the best possible way. When it is present, but this aids heavily in the creation of mood. The film has a wonderful sense of tone as it relates to its technical aspects. Villeneuve has succeeded again at creating a film that is both cinematic and narratively strong. It falters with a certain plot point that may or may not turn off audiences, but the story has interesting facets to it. It is a science fiction fans must see. Based on the trailer alone, I thought Arrival was mostly about a band of alien ships arriving on Earth, our resulting attempts to communicate with them, and the threat of a global war. This is certainly the core of the film, but the storyline shares equal time with a second plot, the personal story of Louise Banks, a brilliant linguist played by Amy Adams. It's risky for a sci-fi movie to pull the viewer into an unexpected commentary on the human experience. If the message feels heavy-handed, hastily constructed, or cheesy, it can sink the rest of the film. Banks' backstory surrounds the death of her daughter from a rare disease, and a marriage that fell apart from the resulting strain. The movie later reveals that what we assumed were flashbacks are actually foreshadowing. The aliens give her the ability to see the future. All of those distressing moments in her life haven't happened yet. At the end of the movie, after Banks saves humanity, she faces a decision: should she begin the relationship that leads to her daughter's birth and premature death? Why, knowing the grief that lies ahead, would she choose the same future? Putting aside the ethical debate of whether to give life to a human being doomed to prematurely suffer and die, the movie affirms a truism that I have only gradually come to realize myself: life is not a means to an end. Happiness, instead, is often found in small, unexpected moments, and a major part of being happy is the ability to recognize and embrace those moments when they occur. Through final flash-forward scenes, we see some of the warm moments that await Banks and her family to be, which juxtapose the sadness and lead her to choose the same path. Whether or not director Denis Villeneuve set out to make this point explicitly or whether it was expressed in the original short story by Ted Chiang, I'm not sure. But the sentiment, or something close to it, is surely there. Though Arrival's creators couldn't have predicted the world's current geopolitical state when they were making the movie, their release timing was stunningly prescient. The aliens arrive in 12 large, cylindrical probes scattered across the globe. The United States, China, and Russia each play host to a ship, forcing the world's superpowers to grudgingly coordinate their efforts to make contact. But a problem soon becomes apparent: who speaks for Earth? And what happens if one nation makes an impulsive move, endangering the rest of humanity? It's an interesting question, and I don't recall any debate moderators asking Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump how they would handle such a scenario. In a way, Arrival's plotline is more plausible than that of The Martian. Don't get me wrong, I thought The Martian was fantastic. But whenever I saw the beautiful spaceship Hermes, I wondered who had tripled NASA's budget. And now, with another possible Moon versus Mars, commercial versus government human spaceflight scuffle on the horizon, as well as a potential funding slash for NASA, it's hard not to feel pessimistic about the chances of sending astronauts to Mars anytime soon. Though Arrival is based on the unlikely probability that we will be contacted by aliens, it plays on the hope that a single precipitating event could alter the course of human history, hopefully for the better. This also happens to be one of the reasons we explore our solar system and the universe. Could the discovery of past or present life beyond Earth have the same effect? Well, they haven't landed, actually. It's more like they're hovering. 12 gigantic, egg-like ships are suspended just above the ground at strategic points around the globe. And every 18 hours, a doorway opens at the bottommost point of each craft to let curious scientists in for a face-to-face with their otherworldly visitors. You see, these huge mysterious creatures glide through a milky mist on the other side of some kind of transparent wall in the ship's interior. They click, ping, knock and moan in what must be some kind of language. But try as they might, the science guys can make neither heads nor tails of it. What's more frustrating, especially to the anxious generals and nail-biting government officials who watch nervously from nearby equipment-stuffed tents, is that no one can figure out how to get their questions across, either. And they have many. Where do you come from, is one. For that matter, what do you want, is another good one. Of course, some of the more squinty-eyed types are wondering if we should be laying out welcome mats or punching in access codes for our nukes. That's when Dr. Louise Banks is summoned. This brilliant American linguistics professor gets tapped by the US government to enter a local alien spacecraft and see what she can do to bridge the communication gap. She's tasked, along with an advanced mathematician expert named Ian Donnelly, with making sense of the large, black, Rorschach-like splotches that these space visitors emit. Banks and Donnelly may be well versed in the latest equations and language concepts. They may feel perfectly comfortable with everything from Arabic to algebra, Cantonese to calculus. But how does someone become fluent in alien clinks and squirts? When an advanced alien species swoops in to hover at points around the globe, the first reaction by some, especially the Russians and Chinese, is to spool up their armed forces and take aim at the invaders. But Louise and Ian are determined to do everything possible to keep things from degenerating into warfare. So they work tirelessly at trying to break the communication code. They step out of their protective outfits, in spite of potential danger, to better reach out to the aliens. They even risk being shot by their own troops in an effort to get another government's leader to veer from a violent path. Personally, Louise struggles with the wrenching grief of losing her daughter, Hannah, to a terminal illness. We see multiple flashbacks to that effect. Despite that emotional agony, though, Louise makes it clear that the joys and rewards of their relationship while her daughter was still alive far outweigh her pain. Louise and Hannah both profess their deep love for one another. In fact, Louise reflects on the painful things of life and says, "Despite knowing the journey and where it leads, I embrace it, and I welcome every moment of it." A news report states that a Pentecostal group has burned its church and that members have committed suicide, thinking that the aliens are a sign of the end times. Louise's husband embraces her, while they're both fully clothed, and asks if she wants to make a baby. After the alien crafts arrive, panicked people to start riot and loot in the streets. We see folks smashing storefronts and wreaking havoc. We also witness large military and naval formations moving into place in anticipation of attack. An explosion results in at least one casualty. Guns are fired off camera and, in another scene, brandished menacingly. We hear that the Russian government executed one of its experts in an effort to keep certain secrets hidden. We see Hannah on her deathbed as she succumbs to a terminal illness. One F word along with one use each of B, tard and H. Characters exclaim, "Oh my God," once or twice. Louise drinks wine. An army doctor gives both Louise and Ian some kind of system-strengthening booster shot that, it's subtly implied, could cause hallucinations. Someone vomits. Television and online commentators foment unrest among their viewers. Arrival is yet another film about mankind's first contact with a super-advanced civilization that we have long imagined to be out there. But this version is a little different. There's no Independence Day-like bim bam boom here. No little green men or giant robots with laser eyes, either. In fact, this intelligent, multi-layered pic is likely not what you're expecting it to be at all. Instead, it's a compelling, well-written film that prompts viewers to think less about our imagined fantasies of faraway stars and far more about the things we cherish most deeply. The film talks of the grief and pain of life, and the human capacity to keep choosing to love and to sacrifice for others in spite of that anguish. So just how does a sci-fi film about a human linguistics expert visiting with aliens that communicate through clicks, knocks, squirts of ethereal ink and room-shaking bass notes do all that? Well, I can't tell you without giving too much away. But I will say that a couple of light but unfortunate content wormholes in this movie's space-time continuum, namely, a smattering of harsh profanity, could well make parents pause before beaming young kids into theater seats. As for the rest of us, well, 2 clicks, 4 knocks and a bass rumble mean, would you like butter with your popcorn? They look like deflated footballs compressed into oblong frisbee shapes. 12 UFOs hover over nondescript locations around the planet without a proclamation of war or peace, no ultimatums, and no understanding of our language whatsoever. Rather than float over major cities, they linger over locations such as an empty field in Montana, over the Black Sea, or in Siberia. They stand 1,500 feet high on their ends, with one end just a few dozen feet away from the Earth's surface. Just there, a door opens, where scientists and paranoid military officials enter to make contact. Human representatives around the world preserve their team's exchanges with the visitors jealously, although they're all looking for answers to the same question: what is your purpose on Earth? But answers in Arrival do not come without some searching, introspection, abstract thought, and solemn emotion. And that's one of the best things about it. Journeyman director Denis Villeneuve brings his expert craftsmanship to author Tet Chiang's short story of Your Life from 1998. Villeneuve's films such as Prisoners, 2013, and Sicario, 2015, find the filmmaker disappearing into the material and, like a chameleon, changing his aesthetic style to serve the story with a meticulous approach. Although the formal qualities of his work have a pristine and precious quality regardless of the material, his measured pacing often keeps the viewer at a distance. However, screenwriter Eric Heiserer's adaptation bonds us with Arrival's protagonist, linguistics expert Dr. Louise Banks, from the first scenes. Amy Adams plays Louise with wounded perseverance and deeply affecting humanity, lending several otherwise awe-inspiring sequences from throughout the film an unexpected intimacy. Indeed, when audiences think of science fiction or UFOs, or they see the spacecraft in Arrival, they will probably think of Independence Day, 1996. And yes, both films feature several similarly shaped ships docking around the planet. But Arrival isn't the mindless blockbuster type in which monuments explode and pyrotechnics incite one-liners and popcorn-munching escapism. In fact, for a major studio release, the result is surprisingly introspective and existential for Louise, and thus the audience. Viewers should expect something more akin to Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977, or Robert Zemeckis' Contact, 1997, wherein a mysterious voyage of language barriers and psychic influence leads to profound personal revelations. To be sure, the methods and themes of Arrival carry an essential antidote to today's antagonistic, strife-ridden form of human interaction. After the visitors establish themselves around the planet, Louise receives a visit from Colonel Weber, Forrest Whitaker, an Army intelligence official who plays her a recording of alien voices. The sounds consist of clicks and tones comparable to whale song, nothing she can translate. She soon finds herself alongside scientist Ian Donnelly, Jeremy Renner, who believes math and science are universal languages, as part of a government operation to open a line of meaningful communication with the aliens in the Montana craft. Entering the monolithic spaceship, dubbed the Shell, in bright orange hazmat suits, the team finds their understanding of physics challenged in the ship's unique gravitational environment, followed by the appearance of the aliens themselves. Named heptapods for their 7 legs and cephalopod-esque appearance, the aliens look like upright hands standing on the tips of their fingers, but they remain behind a clear barrier immersed in a cloudy gas. Louise cannot hope to speak their language and instead communicates through a written form. Even so, their language does not consist of letters or even characters, rather, they deliver inky messages in the form of black, near circle displays, as though Jackson Pollock painted a coffee ring. Each ring represents a complete, complicated sentence of multiple connotations, whereas most earthly languages rely on a comparatively simple structure of letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, and so on. Although the second act conveniently leaps over how Louise and Ian decipher the aliens' ink language, the discoveries provide ample commentary on human beings' general unwillingness to understand another person, culture, race, or way of thinking different from their own. Humans want things basic, simple, and uncomplicated. And when large human groups have to think, especially in terms they do not understand, they become frustrated, angry, and impatient. Such a resounding, ambitious subtext could threaten to undermine the human element of the story, but Louise remains the focus throughout Arrival. Adams delivers a performance of thoughtful humanity, her presence calibrated to match Villeneuve's concentration on inward stillness and contemplation, both of self and the greater situation. Regardless of how incongruous such a notion would seem for a sci-fi picture, it works, and Louise's personal pain and openness to nonlinear thinking largely in flashes to images in her mind provide a crucial perspective to solve the film's puzzle. The turns throughout the story prove deceptively linear and focused. Viewers may even want to return to the film to look for clues after they realize how the puzzle works. Fortunately, Arrival connects the puzzle to its narrative and protagonist in affecting, unexpected ways that build everything on screen and avoid reducing the story structure to a gotcha. Curious but effective tonal modulations and booming sounds from composer Johan Johansson make up the score, lending an unearthly sound to the music and atmosphere to the picture. But if there are any major faults in Arrival, they reside in a couple of distracting visual choices. First, Louise enters the alien craft inside their specific atmosphere at one point and the CGI-created weightlessness leaves Adam's hair looking like cartoon dancing worms. The FX in this sequence may be the sole moment I was removed from the story. Second, cinematographer Bradford Young shoots in a distracting amount of close-ups, aside from some occasional sweeping shots of the shell. Undoubtedly, this choice was to enhance the film's more intimate story elements in juxtaposition with the international scale, but the viewer cannot help but wonder if Villeneuve has catered his visual style to meet the needs of contemporary viewers accustomed to watching TV or movies on their smartphones. Nevertheless, Arrival remains an unlikely sort of sci-fi drama less about aliens and spaceships than the experiential and intangible qualities of life, emotion, and memory. How strange that a $50 million genre production featuring major stars and a wide theatrical release would contain themes about clear communication that resonate in such personal ways. Moreover, this is a quiet film devoid of shouting or a barrage of explosions, the type of film where the audience remains silently absorbed throughout. Its general decibel level hums along softly, requiring viewers to focus and become captivated. At the center of that captivation is Adams' incredible performance and Villeneuve's careful, detailed approach. Both cerebral and achingly emotional, Arrival sustains a message about hope and understanding for a better humanity that audiences may need right now. The movie, released in 2016, didn't reveal much when the trailers were dropped, creating a mystery of a film that led audiences to believe that it was some sort of mix between an all-out alien invasion thriller and a film about communication between humans and alien languages. While in a very basic way describing it as this wouldn't be incorrect, it is still far more than simply a hybrid between two distinctive genres. From the beginning, where it depicts Dr. Louise Banks' memory of her daughter growing up and eventually dying of cancer, audiences realize that this was going to draw far deeper emotionally than we expected. With repeat viewings, I've seen this 4 times, the director has left little clues for us to pick up on something more than what is shown on the surface. It can be as little a touch as the style of how the spaceship is balanced to something as massive as figuring out the aliens' way of communication. If one simply peels the onion little by little on each detail and stylistic choice, you will discover a whole new world of cinematic magic. As Louise finds her role to perform as a linguist to decipher the aliens' language, she finds a major difference between our language and theirs. We communicate in sentences, whilst they communicate in circles, expressing their thoughts all in one instance. This also means that the heptapods, aliens, differ in how they not only language, but time. As humanity writes and talks, it matches the way we see time passing. Experiencing every single moment one after the other in slow, methodical succession as each word comes out of our minds. This concept becomes truly intriguing when we take in the parts of our own lives into it. Our past is, obviously, already known despite some flaws in memory, the present is becoming known at every moment, and the future is a vast world of unpredictability, slowly waiting to become a part of our present and past. On the other hand, the heptapods communicate in circles, meaning that their perception of past, present and future is all the same, equally known and remembered. At first, Louise reminisces of her daughter's life and death, but then an idea called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis comes into consideration. This theory principally explains that if you immerse yourself in learning a foreign language enough, you can literally rewire your brain. It sounds like utter drivel, but it actually works towards this film's benefit. In other words, the language you speak equals how you think. Mysterious, am I right? That your brain could actually be hardwired differently depending on the language you speak. Not only this, but it can also change your perception, or how you see everything. However, as she continues to learn the circle language, the movie makes it clear that the past, or Louise's memories of her daughter, is actually the future. I'll talk about how emotionally devastating this realization is later, but just take a second to think about this. The future is now remembered as much as her past, and it's only through this new language, this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that she realizes this. With the heptapod's language, Louise has learned to transcend the arrow of time that we all live in. This arrow of time is basically just living life in a normal way, slowly catapulting towards inevitable death. Remembering the past, living the present, and trying to predict the future. Transcending it means you have broke free of everyday life, and past, present, and future have collided in one beautifully indecipherable yet completely understandable explosion of time. Like the aliens' language, the film's storytelling is circular instead of linear, coming to a full close at the end. When she hugs Jeremy Renner's character at the finale, it represents her choosing to embrace the joys and sorrows of the life she knows will live. Another thing that becomes truly apparent while drawing deep on the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is how depressing and emotionally painful it is to live it. Louise may have saved the aliens from being wrongfully attacked by humanity, but she forgot her own mental well-being. All the memories of her daughter's birth, life, and tragic young death, coupled with her husband leaving her to live out her sorrows alone, are all things that will happen in her future. She has to go through life knowing that her daughter will die of cancer, and the man she loves, who we find out is Jeremy Renner's character, leaves them both. Just thinking about how all the joys and beauty of being a mother will be sucked out by the pain of knowledge is tragic to think about, and it proves once again how Denis Villeneuve uses heartbreaking material in a subtle way that isn't necessarily easy to decipher. People have criticized his films for being emotionless, especially Blade Runner 2049, but simply because you have to crack the puzzle to find the true heartbreak in Arrival or his other masterpieces doesn't mean there isn't any. This is a beautiful film, and I'm not just talking about the cinematography or visual effects, but the feelings this makes you evoke is profound if you look deep enough. Another aspect that this movie nails is the foreshadowing of the immense change that will come in Louise's life. Watching the film on first viewing, seeing Louise walk down a circular hallway doesn't really mean anything, but on second viewing, it is juxtaposed with a previous shot of Louise walking in a straight line. It foreshadows the way she will eventually think in the future, utterly aligned with the aliens' thoughts. By the end of the film, just like the main character, audiences too have come to see Arrival as Louise has come to see her life. It's only on a rewatch in which we experience the true significance and beauty of each and every moment. The language of the heptapods represents the full circle that this movie has come before the end credits, key to understanding the film's underlying themes of meaning and interpretation. Philosophers refer to this as the hermeneutic circle. I had to look up the definition of this, which explains that the whole defines the parts as the parts define the whole. Oh yeah, we're getting super philosophical here. Part and whole are working together to form the true meaning of any sort of text. This basically means that to understand a specific part of something, you must figure out the whole before. The main conflict in the story of this movie, which is questioning the purpose of the heptapod's arrival, creates a crisis that solidifies this theory. Although primarily it focuses on Louise's interactions with one singular ship, the larger conflict surrounds what to do with the total of 12 heptapod ships located in random places around the globe. This leads the 12 nations in which the ships landed in to collaborate and share progress with each other. However, much to the distaste to many countries, when enough of their language is learned to ask their purpose on Earth, their response was translated to offer weapon. The heptapod's ultimate sign for true purpose is represented through past human experiences. This specifically relates to Louise's memories. In a powerfully metaphorical and climactic moment, Louise is actually invited to write with their language on the glass screen that separates them from the aliens, which causes her to experience rapid flashes of more memory before a cloud of signs suddenly erupts. As I mentioned right before, a cloud of signs erupts directly after Louise experiences flashes of these new memories. If you paid a little attention, you may notice that clouds are a visual motif in the movie, or imagery that keeps repeating itself throughout the film. After Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner analyzed the new burst of data they received, it's found out that the empty, incomplete, space reveals the incompleteness of Louise's knowledge of their language. The positions of the ships are in fact not random. The heptapods have strategically placed their ships in these 12 places to make a puzzle of sorts for Louise to crack, but she needs the other 11 pieces of the puzzle. It requires teamwork between these nations to bring the parts together to make a cohesive whole out of their scattered language. It sends a beautiful message about unification no matter where you are in the world, but it also is symbolism for a clock, which of course reverts back to my points about the parts and whole of time. Not only do the nations have to come together in order to solve this, but Louise herself must piece together the pieces of her timeline to connect the dots. Time is language in this movie, and our language is simply nothing greater than the hermeneutic circle by which we interpret anything. Albeit, in a generic and unimaginative way. Unfortunately, our languages are the boundaries in the world we live in. It creates obstacles and limits in which you cannot cross in fear of breaking the norms. Languages keep us a united society, but they also keep us caved by missed opportunities. Another way one could look at all of this that the present language we use represent the limitations of our memories. We cannot remember everything that's happened in the past. Our present language has made this an impossible achievement. Language is the end result of a past experience, so even learning an alien language will not allow Louise to fully remember a future she has not yet lived. However, she can roughly predict what's going to happen next as any of us can, which is almost like re-watching this movie. The circular language of the heptapods is obviously representative of the film's unique, circular way in which it chooses to tell its story. The heptapod's ship really represents the entirety of Louise's life, which is probably the primary reason why the position of the spaceship is different than most depictions of alien arrivals. Based on several analyses that I have watched on this film, it's really no secret that this alludes, or references to the black monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey. This monolith may seem like it appears in random places at random times, but it's actually a symbol of human evolution. It appears whenever humanity is at some breaking point in evolution. The beginning of all mankind, man's movement into space, and finally at the main character's deathbed and place of birth. Similarly, the tunnel at the end of the ship in Arrival represents death, and the quick flashes of memories that Louise sees are to be associated with the flashes a person who's on their deathbed receives right before they move on. This all brings things full circle, and I hope this analysis was found to be helpful. Do you know what makes Arrival a beautiful film to watch? Its simplicity. The simplicity in its concept, direction, and execution, which may feel familiar but is completely different from what you normally see. Arrival takes something so grand and far-reaching and yet speaks volumes on how we view the world today. Its ultimate message so clear and precise, it's how we take that on board to shape our future. Arrival is an unconventional sci-fi film. Why unconventional? Well, imagine a typical alien invasion movie. Hollywood as of late, whether it's Independence Day, both original and its sequel, Battle Los Angeles, any of the Transformers films or Skyline for example, have always relied on spectacle. We want to be dazzled and amazed both visually and technically. We watch as aliens showcase their full destructive power, whether we're viewing it on an IMAX screen or in the comforts of our own homes. They always get the landmarks, a line which Independence Day, Resurgence boasts as our capital cities are given an extensive remodeling job. In our popcorn heaven delight, we witness mankind fight back with all our military muscle as we lose ourselves in our guilty pleasure fantasies. It's not to say there's anything wrong with those films, with exception of Transformers, because they are all bad, but those films miss a vital ingredient that makes an impact and connection with the audience, heart and purpose. The real beauty of an alien invasion film, when done properly, is not the aliens themselves or their power. They are merely antagonists bringing to light the choices humanity must face. How do we react? How do we coexist or fight back? What would you do? This aspect becomes a sacrificial neglect for films which rely solely on the visual spectacle. It means we don't get involved in the predicaments characters face, and they're missing a trick. It is our connection with human nature that allows us to follow characters as they face those enticing yet explorative questions. It's why a certain number of sci-fi films become more than just films. They shed their cult status tag or initially poor and misguided reviews. They evolve into a new creation. They become iconic. They become endearing. They become legendary. Arrival certainly belongs in that crowd and caps off what has been a phenomenal return of brilliant yet thought-provoking sci-fi films back on our screens. So how does Arrival set itself apart? Well, first of all, it doesn't follow the traditional method and response of what typical alien invasion films fall into. It doesn't respond with a shoot first, ask later mantra. It doesn't respond with an alien threat to wipe out humanity and our natural resources like a boot stepping on a colony of ants. Arrival merely wants to understand what first contact would be like. It presents it as an unnerving and uncomfortable experience, thanks to the brilliant soundtrack by Jóhann Jóhannsson. Arrival debunks and removes one assumption that some invasion films have: how aliens communicate with the human race. Obviously it's not intentional, but most alien invasion films make an arrogant assumption that aliens speak English or certainly understand Earth language. Why are they here? What is their purpose? Where are they from? When dealing with an unknown threat and entity, these are important questions that immediately come to mind. But in order to get to that point, we need to understand them. Arrival intelligently deconstructs the concept of language, breaking it down and simplifying it. Like how parents would teach children words, communicative language is restructured and repurposed into something tangible. By doing this, it breaks down barriers by promoting a trade-off between the species. This has been a trying week in a lot of ways for America. In the wake of the 2016 presidential election, the American people find themselves confronted with a gulf separating them from their fellow citizens, an overwhelming apathy towards both politics and that massive divide. It's putting it lightly that this has been a rough one. The election has spotlighted the turmoil, global geopolitical strife, and the unreliability of polling in regards to the voice of much of the country. Fears on both sides of the aisles, mistrust, and flat-out hate going unrecognized and unaddressed. In more ways than one, many of the problems we're facing both as a country and members of the human race can be boiled down to trust, fear, and communication. Many of the most pressing issues we deal with as a planet day to day have their roots in the ways in which those concepts intermingle horribly, in the ways in which communication breaks down. With that in mind, I can think of no better film through which to examine humanity's strengths, failings, and potential than Denis Villeneuve's 2016 First Contact sci-fi film, Arrival. The film begins with a short, heartbreaking sequence that left me stunned before the aliens even arrived, and the lighting fast switch to the larger story at play expertly sets the tone for the film, at once intensely personal and universal in consequence. The premise of the film, like many great pieces of science fiction, is straightforward enough. 12 mysterious and towering ships have suddenly appeared around the world and are simply hovering in place above the ground. Nicknamed shells, the object's purpose, the reason for their global landing sites, and whether they are manned is unknown. Once the United States military enters a shell and discovers what's inside, namely physics they can't understand and aliens they can't speak to, they reach out to two experts. Those experts, played to perfection, are linguistics professor Louise Banks, Amy Adams, her, the master, and theoretical physicist Ian Donnelly, Jeremy Renner, the Hurt Locker, the Avengers. Louise is given one question she must ask: what is your purpose on Earth? Ian's job is to both help and figure out how they got here. Arrival has quickly catapulted itself to the top of my best of 2016 list, and that is a feat in a year where we saw both The Witch and Swiss Army Man, and for good reason. Arrival is an incredibly well-crafted film. A beautiful and resonant story, adapted from Ted Chiang's 1998 short story Story of Your Life by Eric Heiserer, The Conjuring 2, Hours, incredible scoring by Johan Johansson, Sicario, The Theory of Everything, and pitch-perfect cinematography by Bradford Young, Selma, Ain't Them Bodies Saints, mesh perfectly with Villeneuve's intensely personal and poignant style of directing. The pace, which in honesty may be too slow for your average movie fan, is absolutely perfect for the story being told. Villeneuve wisely lingers in the right places and blazes in others. This is the work of a mature director who knows exactly how to make a story sing. There are enough strong, earned moments both on the sci-fi side of things and on the emotional front to fill two movies. That story is one focused on the human race's response to the alien species' arrival. The United States is not the only country on Earth with a mysterious shell hovering above it. In fact, the US is working with 11 other countries to assess and understand the alien beings, what their purpose is, and what is to be done about them. The nations are at odds over how to approach the visitors. China is poised to attack, the United States wants to reason with them, and nobody can quite figure out which approach should be best. Worst of all, not everyone is sharing their information, or at least not all of it. This is a film in which a translator is the hero, and I can think of no better parable for the modern world than that. Villeneuve is not shy about his aliens. They are introduced quickly, shown often, and the lore surrounding them is richly crafted, deftly delivered, and enthralling. I have not been this interested in an alien species in a science fiction film since, well, Alien. However, the film isn't really about them. Like many of my favorite pieces of science fiction, the out-of-this-world threat is more a vehicle through which to explore and discuss deeply earthly problems, and here, those deeply earthly problems boil down to communication. This is a film about people. Ordinary people reacting to extraordinary circumstances. To be more precise, this is a film about a single person, and how that person handles the incredible responsibility placed on her shoulders. Amy Adams Louise. Arrival is in safe hands, being driven by Adams Louise. There is not a poor performance in the film. Renner's Ian is charming and charismatic, Forrest Whitaker is stellar as always, and the child actors throughout the film are simply charming, beautiful, and moving. Adams, however, remains the star. Her Louise is gifted and conflicted. Her struggles to perform under increasing pressure, her resolute drive and stubborn refusal to fail are deeply human and astonishing to watch. Her emotional arc through the course of the film, and through the events of her life as depicted therein, are absolutely beautiful and at turns heartbreaking and inspiring. If Adams does not receive an Academy Award nomination for this role, I will have lost my faith in the institution. She is that damn good. This film is that damn good. Arrival is both an incredibly well-made piece of cinema and a deeply moving journey. Simultaneously tackling intimate human relationships, and the relationships between humanity as a whole, Villeneuve and company have created a beautiful hard science fiction film that speaks to love, loss, mortality, grief, fear, and perhaps most importantly the value of communication. With the world in the shape we find it and the problems we face growing more frightening every day, we would be well served as citizens of the world to make this film a hit, and even better off having taken the lessons presented within it to heart. It would be overly simplistic to say that a single film can heal a nation, but I believe Arrival can give us some of the language we'll need to do it. This film, directed by Denis Villeneuve, screenplay by Eric Heiserer, based on Story of Your Life, produced by Shawn Levy, starring Amy Adams, cinematography Bradford Young, edited by Joe Walker, music by Johan Johansson, production companies FilmNation, distributed by Paramount Pictures, release date September 1, 2016, running time 116 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $47 million, box office $203 million.